Boston, 2003. The Donovan townhouse on Beacon Hill looked like success carved in brick, mahogany doors, brass handles, the smell of polish and quiet authority. Robert Donovan liked to remind anyone who entered that he had started Donovan and Partners Logistics from a single truck and a folding desk in South Boston. He still kept that desk in his study, as proof that grit, not luck, had built the empire. Inside that house, hierarchy was invisible, but absolute. Robert's word moved the family like gears in one of his loading docks. Margaret Donovan, his wife, managed the household books and, quietly, part of the company's early accounting. She spoke little during dinners, letting Robert's booming voice fill the air with stories about contracts won and competitors crushed. When he laughed, everyone else was expected to smile. Vanessa, the younger daughter, learned that rhythm easily. She had her father's charm and her mother's looks, and Robert treated her like the crown jewel of his legacy. "She's got presence," he would say. People remember her name. At 12, she was already rehearsing handshakes in front of the mirror, dreaming of boardrooms. Claire, 2 years older, preferred silence. While her father taught Vanessa to deliver a confident pitch, Claire spent evenings buried in library books, fascinated by numbers and patterns. She could sense how each truck route, each invoice, fit together like a puzzle, but no one asked her to share it. "You think too much, sweetheart," Robert told her once, half smiling. "Business isn't a math problem. It's a man's instinct." At school she excelled, collecting awards that were displayed briefly on the mantel before being replaced by Vanessa's dance trophies or glossy family photos. Margaret sometimes tried to even the balance, a soft hand on Claire's shoulder, a whispered, "I see you, honey." But even that comfort came with caution. Robert disliked oversensitivity. Every Sunday, the family drove to the company's main warehouse, where Robert walked the floor like a general inspecting troops. Workers straightened their backs. Managers followed 2 steps behind. Claire watched quietly from the catwalk above, memorizing everything, the routes, the names on the trucks, the numbers stamped on each crate. She knew this place better than anyone, yet to her father she remained a visitor. By the time she turned 15, she understood the unspoken rule of the Donovan household. Success had a face, and it wasn't hers. Vanessa was the future of the family. Claire was the footnote. She didn't resent them, not yet. But somewhere beneath her calm exterior, a quiet distance began to form, the kind that would one day grow into resolve. By the time Claire graduated from Northeastern with her MBA, the Donovan name had become a fixture in Boston's business pages. Donovan and Partners Logistics boasted nearly 300 employees, a fleet of trucks with the company crest painted in navy and gold, and contracts with every major hospital in New England. Her father's empire was thriving, or so he said. To him, Claire's degree was an ornament, something to mention in holiday cards, but not to be taken seriously. When she asked to join the firm, he sighed as if granting charity. "Fine," he said. "We'll start you in analytics. Try not to overcomplicate things." Her first morning at the Seaport District headquarters, Claire arrived before sunrise, only to find most of the office running on muscle memory. Paper invoices stacked in leaning towers, delivery schedules scribbled on corkboards, phones ringing off the hook. A manager handed her a stapler and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart, you'll get the hang of it." It wasn't malice, it was assumption. The same assumption that had always followed her, that she was harmless, decorative, her father's daughter playing at business. 2 days later, Vanessa breezed in from London, trailing perfume and applause. Robert announced her new title, Vice President of Development, as if she'd been crowned. Vanessa accepted the role with a radiant smile and no questions asked. She had a corner office before Claire even received her employee ID. "Dad thinks I'll bring in a modern image," Vanessa said over lunch, adjusting her sunglasses. "He says you'll handle the numbers behind the scenes." Perfect balance. Right. Claire managed to smile. It wasn't balance. It was hierarchy dressed as fairness. Weeks turned into months. Claire buried herself in spreadsheets, learning every fragile seam in the company's operations. She discovered that nearly 20% of the fleet was overdue for maintenance, that fuel expenses were misreported, and that contracts were renewed through personal favors rather than performance. When she tried to raise these issues during a department meeting, her voice was drowned out by jokes about MBA theories and women who overthink logistics. Even her father chuckled. Relax, Claire. This company was built on handshake deals, not algorithms. In quiet moments, she compared the Donovan office to the world she had just left. Classmates launching startups, professors discussing automation, women leading strategy teams. Here, time seemed to stop somewhere around 1995. She found herself wondering whether the company's celebrated stability was actually stagnation in disguise. At night, Claire lingered in her cubicle long after everyone left, tracing patterns in the data that no one else bothered to see. She didn't crave recognition, only efficiency, proof that reason could coexist with legacy. But the more she understood the numbers, the more she recognized how deeply her father's pride was woven into every inefficiency. Changing the system would mean challenging him directly, and that was something no one in the Donovan family had ever dared to do. The office grew quiet after 6 each evening, when the managers hurried home and the fluorescent lights hummed over empty desks. That was when Claire came alive. She'd spread her reports across the conference table, a mosaic of invoices, delivery logs, and quarterly summaries. Patterns emerged, small at first, then unmistakable. The company wasn't stable. It was leaking clients like water through cracked pipes. Younger logistics firms were offering real-time tracking, online scheduling, digital billing. Donovan and Partners was still handwriting delivery slips. Claire watched the numbers decline month after month. One lost account in Providence, another in Hartford. A major Boston retailer quietly switching to a startup run by 2 20-something MIT grads. She felt a chill she couldn't ignore. The world had shifted while her father's company stood still. One night, she stopped by her parents' Beacon Hill townhouse for dinner, hoping for an ally. Margaret noticed the exhaustion in her daughter's eyes before the plates even reached the table. "You've been working too hard," she said softly. "Your father won't change overnight." Claire hesitated, then opened her laptop to show the charts she'd built, color-coded evidence of the company's decline. If we modernize, automate the fleet management, create a digital client portal, we can stop the bleeding. Margaret studied the screen, her brow furrowed. "You're right," she whispered, almost to herself. "You always see what others miss." Then, after a pause, she added carefully, "But you know your father. Choose your moment. He listens best when he thinks it's his idea." The next morning, Claire rehearsed her pitch twice before walking into Robert's office. He was dictating notes to his assistant, phone pressed to one ear, already halfway through another deal. When she asked for 10 minutes, he sighed but gestured for her to continue. She spoke clearly, laying out the data, declining revenue, outdated logistics, competitors eating their market share. She mentioned automation, online dashboards, data integration. Robert listened for maybe 2 minutes before leaning back in his chair. "You've been reading too many tech blogs," he said, a half-smile tugging at his mouth. "This company runs on relationships, not fancy software. You can't teach instinct, Claire." Across the room, Vanessa perched on the window ledge, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up until Robert added, "You're too theoretical, honey. You'd do better observing how things actually work." Vanessa finally glanced up, smirking. Maybe let the old man handle the big stuff. Something in Claire's chest tightened. Not anger exactly, but a deep, wordless clarity. She closed her laptop without arguing. "Understood," she said quietly and left the room. That night, back in her apartment overlooking the Charles River, she stared at the city lights reflecting off the water. The humiliation burned, but underneath it was something sharper: resolve. If no one would listen, she would let results speak for her. Change would come, even if she had to build it in silence. For 3 months, Claire lived in the glow of her laptop screen, long after midnight. She studied competitor platforms, mapped out supply chains, and built a comprehensive proposal that could pull Donovan and partners into the modern age. The plan included digital fleet tracking, automated inventory systems, a client portal with real-time shipment updates, and data-driven forecasting. Every chart, every calculation was airtight. She imagined the day she'd show it to her father and, just maybe, earn his respect. When she finally finished, she printed the deck and rehearsed the presentation until she could deliver it flawlessly without notes. The company's monthly management meeting was her opportunity. Around the long walnut table sat the usual mix of department heads, men Robert had known since his first warehouse, men who called him Bob and toasted him at golf clubs. Vanessa arrived late, dressed impeccably, balancing a latte and a half-smile. Robert began the meeting with a joke about keeping old trucks running and daughters out of trouble, and everyone laughed politely. When Claire's turn came, she connected her laptop to the projector. The first slide appeared: Donovan and Partners, Strategic Modernization for Sustainable Growth. She spoke clearly and precisely, explaining how digital infrastructure would reduce delivery delays, cut costs, and attract younger clients. For the first time, she saw some heads tilt forward, real interest flickering. But halfway through, Robert interrupted. "Claire, this is all very academic," he said, glancing around the table for agreement. "We've been doing this for 30 years without dashboards or apps." A few men chuckled, eager to align with the boss. Vanessa crossed her legs and leaned back, whispering something to the HR director that drew quiet laughter. Claire took a slow breath. "Dad, the market's changing. This isn't theory, it's survival. Clients expect transparency now. If we don't adapt, we'll—" Robert waved a hand. "Will what? Lose a few impatient millennials? Don't worry about that. Leave the strategy to those of us who've actually built something." The silence that followed was suffocating. Someone cleared his throat. Vanessa finally spoke, tone sweet but cutting. "It's impressive, Claire, but maybe it's a little tech-heavy?" "Dad's right. Our clients prefer people over portals." Claire's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She nodded once, disconnected her laptop, and gathered her papers while the conversation moved on without her. Robert was already shifting to the next topic, Vanessa's upcoming PR campaign, when the meeting adjourned. She lingered in the empty room, staring at the flickering projector light. Her plan lay there, immaculate and unwanted. For a long moment, she wondered if all her effort had meant nothing. But then, something inside her hardened. She would stop asking for permission. If they couldn't see the future, she would build it quietly, piece by piece, until they had no choice but to notice. The Monday after that disastrous meeting, Claire arrived at the office earlier than usual. A paper cup of black coffee in one hand and a new resolve in the other. She no longer needed her father's approval. What she needed was proof. Proof that numbers told the truth even when people refused to listen. She started small. When the IT technician mentioned an outdated software license in the logistics department, she seized the opportunity. "Let's call it a maintenance upgrade," she said casually, signing off on the request herself. In reality, the update included the first module of her digital management system, an automated scheduling tool that assigned trucks based on efficiency rather than seniority or habit. At first, no one noticed. The dispatchers were just relieved their ancient system stopped crashing. But within a week, drivers began returning earlier from their routes. Deliveries synced seamlessly, and idle time dropped by almost 15%. The warehouse supervisor, a weary man named Bill, stopped by her cubicle one evening, scratching his head. "Whatever you did down there, keep doing it," he said. "Even the night shifts on time for once." Encouraged, Claire quietly expanded her upgrades. She trained 2 mid-level managers, people often overlooked by the old guard, to use the new analytics dashboard. She framed it as internal tracking for compliance audits, something no one dared question. Together, they started mapping real-time delivery performance, cost trends, and client satisfaction metrics. Within 2 months, customer complaints had fallen by nearly half. She didn't take credit. She didn't need to. Watching the system come alive was enough for now. At night, she stayed behind, reviewing data while the city outside dimmed into a web of amber lights. There was a strange comfort in working unseen, like tending a secret garden in hostile soil. By the end of the quarter, profits had risen noticeably. During the executive meeting, Robert beamed as he reviewed the financials. "Looks like the market's finally turning around," he said, patting Vanessa's shoulder. Her branding push must be paying off. Claire kept her expression neutral. No one mentioned the new efficiency reports, or how the warehouse turnaround times had improved by 20%. She was invisible again, but this time by design. Vanessa leaned close afterward, her perfume sharp and expensive. "See, you worry too much," she said lightly. "Sometimes things just work out." Claire smiled faintly. Things work out because someone makes them. She thought but didn't say. In the weeks that followed, she fine-tuned her system, documenting every measurable gain. It wasn't about rebellion anymore. It was about results. She was building the company her father refused to imagine, one quiet fix at a time. And yet, each success without acknowledgement sharpened the edge of something deeper, a hunger not for praise but for truth. One day, they would see exactly what her theories had accomplished, and when they did, there would be no denying it. 6 months later, the Donovans marked 2 milestones at once: the 25th anniversary of Donovan and Partners Logistics and Claire's 35th birthday. Robert insisted on hosting the event at the Old Concord, an old-money restaurant in Back Bay with dark mahogany panels and waiters in pressed white jackets. A string quartet played near the bar, their music blending with the hum of polite conversation and expensive laughter. Claire arrived early, dressed simply in a navy sheath dress, hair pulled back, a quiet elegance that made her invisible among the sequined wives and tailored suits. She had spent the afternoon finishing quarterly reports, numbers that showed the company's strongest performance in years, then handed them to her father, who hadn't even looked up from his phone. By 7, the dining hall glittered with shareholders, clients, and old family friends. Robert stood beneath the chandelier, a glass of champagne in one hand, his other resting proudly on Vanessa's shoulder. 25 years ago, he began, this company was one truck and a dream. Today, it's an empire, and while I'm proud of everyone here, one person deserves special recognition. Claire's chest tightened. For a fleeting second, she thought maybe he meant her. "Vanessa," he said, voice booming. "Our vice president of development, the creative mind behind our image campaign and expansion strategy. She represents the next generation of Donovan leadership." Applause erupted. Vanessa beamed, cheeks glowing under the candlelight. A waiter stepped forward with a small velvet box, and Robert opened it with theatrical flair. Inside lay a set of car, keys attached to a silver ribbon. "A Mercedes GLC," he announced, "because vision deserves horsepower." Laughter, another round of toasts. Vanessa kissed him on the cheek. Camera flashes sparked. Claire lifted her glass mechanically, smiling for appearance's sake. No one mentioned that Vanessa's strategy had been a glossy rebrand of operations Claire had quietly rebuilt. Then Robert turned toward her. "And of course," he said, "we can't forget our numbers wizard." The guests chuckled. He reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a white envelope. and tossed it across the table. It slid to a stop in front of her plate. "Happy birthday, kiddo. That's all you're worth." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel so much as nervous, people unsure whether it was a joke. Claire stared at the envelope, the words echoing louder than the music. She opened it. Inside was a check for $1,000. Not a bonus, not even a note. Just the amount and his looping signature. For a moment, she couldn't feel her hands. Vanessa giggled lightly. "Come on, Dad, that's harsh." But he only grinned. "She knows I'm kidding. Claire's tough. She takes after me." Margaret's eyes flickered with something like apology, but she stayed silent. Claire swallowed, forcing a steady breath. She stood, smoothing her dress, her voice calm. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's generous." Robert raised his glass again. "To family," he declared. Crystal clinked around her. Laughter resumed. Conversation shifted. Within minutes, she ceased to exist in that room. Outside, the March wind bit through her coat as she stepped onto Commonwealth Avenue. Snow melt glistened on the pavement, catching the city lights. She walked without direction. The sound of traffic filling the silence, left by laughter. At the corner, she paused beneath the glow of a street lamp, staring at the envelope still clenched in her glove. "That's all you're worth." The words repeated until they no longer hurt, they crystallized. She folded the check neatly, slipped it into her pocket, and started walking again. The night was cold, but her steps were steady. Something had broken, but something else had begun. Claire didn't go home right away. She wandered the streets of Back Bay until the restaurant's laughter became a faint echo behind her. By the time she reached her apartment overlooking the Charles River, the city was quiet, its windows flickering like distant fires. She dropped her purse on the counter and set the envelope beside it. The check lay there like a statement carved in ink. "That's all you're worth." She poured herself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, staring into nothing. Humiliation had a way of hollowing her out, leaving space for something else to take root. She wasn't crying anymore. She was calculating. Her gaze fell to the old oak cabinet where she kept family paperwork, copies of contracts, tax records, company newsletters. Years ago, her mother had given her a faded manila folder for safekeeping, saying it contained documents from the company's early days. At the time, Claire hadn't thought much of it. Now, her curiosity sharpened like a blade. She spread the papers across the table, scanning line after line until she reached the founding documents of Donovan and Partners Logistics. Margaret Donovan, co-founder, 30% shareholder. Her pulse quickened. She flipped to a notarized transfer sheet dated the summer of her 18th birthday. Her mother's handwriting. Neat and deliberate. Transfer of 15% ownership to Claire E. Donovan. For a moment, she simply stared at the page, the reality of it unfolding. All these years, she'd been treated as a guest in her father's empire, when in truth, she owned a piece of it, a real legal piece. And if her mother still held her remaining 15%, together they controlled a full 30%, enough to demand transparency, audits, even board meetings under Massachusetts corporate law. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The pain from the night's humiliation didn't fade, it transformed. It became leverage. Numbers again, but this time they were personal. On impulse, she reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name, Daniel Prescott. He'd been a classmate during her MBA program, a quiet genius who'd gone on to Harvard Law and now ran a corporate practice downtown. She hesitated only a second before pressing call. The line rang twice. "Claire." His voice was warm but surprised. "It's been years." "I need legal advice," she said, steady and direct, "about corporate ownership and shareholder rights." There was a pause, then his tone shifted, professional, focused. "Tell me everything." Claire looked down at the document spread before her. the ink glinting under the kitchen light. "It's about my father's company," she said, "and it's time I finally claim my part in it." The next morning, Claire met Daniel Prescott in his office, overlooking Post Office Square. It was one of those immaculate downtown spaces where everything, mahogany desk, minimalist art, filtered sunlight, seemed designed to make clients feel both small and safe. But Claire didn't feel small anymore. She felt deliberate. Daniel greeted her with that same quiet steadiness she remembered from school. Still analyzing everything down to the decimal, he teased gently as they sat. She managed a faint smile. "Maybe this time the decimals will save me." She laid the folder on his desk. Within minutes, his expression changed from curiosity to intrigue. He skimmed the founding agreement, the notarized transfer, the company's latest filings. Then he looked up, eyes sharp. "Your mother still holds 15%. Claire nodded. "And she transferred 15 to me when I turned 18. I never thought it mattered." "It matters," he said. "A lot. Under Massachusetts corporate law. 30% combined ownership gives you the right to request a full financial audit, inspect records, and, if necessary, call a shareholders' meeting. You're not just an employee, Claire. You're a stakeholder, legally and strategically." She sat back, absorbing the words. For years, her ideas had been dismissed as theories. Now, the law itself gave her a voice. "My father's always treated the company as his personal property," she murmured. Daniel folded his hands. "Then it's time he remembers it's not. You don't need to start a war, just assert your rights. Paperwork can do what arguments never could." That night, Claire visited her parents' townhouse. Margaret was in the study, sorting through bills. When Claire explained what she and Daniel had discovered, her mother went still, the papers slipping from her fingers. "I always meant for you to have something," Margaret said softly. "Your father never wanted to share ownership, but I built that company with him. Every invoice, every payroll check. When I gave you those shares, I was protecting your place in it." Claire felt a lump rise in her throat. "Would you stand with me if I asked for a financial review? Nothing hostile, just transparency." Margaret hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If that's the only way he'll listen to reason, yes. I'm tired of watching you work twice as hard for half the respect." They sat together for a long time in the glow of a desk lamp. Mother and daughter joined by something stronger than blood, a shared truth finally uncovered. As Claire drove home through the quiet Boston streets, her mind buzzed not with anger, but with precision. For the first time, the imbalance felt solvable, measurable, almost mathematical. She had the proof, the law, and her mother's support. The company that had silenced her for years would now have to hear her, not because she demanded it, but because she owned the right to be heard. Robert found the envelope on his desk early Monday morning, wedged between a stack of invoices and his morning paper. The header read, "Formal request for financial audit pursuant to Massachusetts Corporate Statute 156D." For a few seconds, he simply stared at it, unsure whether to laugh or explode. Then he flipped through the pages and saw the signatures, Claire E. Donovan and Margaret L. Donovan. 30% of the company's ownership, combined, invoking their legal right. By the time he reached Claire's office, the floor trembled under his footsteps. Her door flew open without a knock. "What the hell is this?" he thundered, waving the document like a weapon. Claire looked up from her computer, composed, almost serene. "It's a request for an independent audit. Perfectly standard procedure." "Standard," he barked. "You go behind my back, file legal paperwork against your own father, and call it standard." She stood, meeting his glare. "It's not against you. It's for the company. The numbers don't add up, and you know it. We need transparency before we can grow." Robert's face flushed crimson. "Don't lecture me on growth. I built this business from nothing while you were still playing with spreadsheets. You think reading a few articles about automation makes you an expert?" Claire didn't flinch. I think refusing to adapt makes you blind. He slammed his fist on her desk, papers scattering. You're betraying your family, Claire. Her voice stayed calm, steady. No, I'm protecting it from becoming obsolete. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. For the first time, the office fell silent enough that she could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Robert stared at her, stunned, as if seeing her for the first time. Not the dutiful daughter, not the assistant, but a woman who could stand toe-to-toe with him. Do you even understand what you've done? He said finally, voice lower now, almost uncertain. Yes, she said. I've followed the bylaws. Section 16.02 grants minority shareholders the right to financial review in cases of managerial concern. I'm not asking for control, Dad. I'm asking for accountability. The word Dad softened something in his eyes for just a second, but pride won the battle. He pointed toward the door. You're playing with fire. Maybe, Claire replied quietly, but at least I'm not pretending it's still 1995. He stood there a moment longer, chest heaving, before turning on his heel and slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. When the echo faded, Claire exhaled slowly and sat back down. Her hands trembled, but her resolve did not. For years she had fought invisible battles, dismissive smiles, patronizing laughter, rooms that never took her seriously. Now, the fight was no longer hidden, and for the first time, Robert Donovan understood that his daughter wasn't just asking to be heard. She already had a voice and the law behind it. The Beacon Hill townhouse glowed with soft amber light that evening, its windows reflecting the chill of early winter. Inside, the mahogany dining table gleamed, polished to perfection. Margaret had set out the good china, Robert's way of signaling that whatever was about to happen was a family matter. Claire arrived last, laptop in hand, data neatly organized. Vanessa was already seated beside their father, her phone face down, but never far from reach. Robert cleared his throat as Claire took her seat. All right, he said, tone clipped. You wanted a meeting. Let's hear it. Claire opened her laptop, projecting charts onto the wall. I'm not here to fight, she began evenly. I'm here to present a path forward. The audit confirmed inefficiencies we can fix. With some restructuring, we can modernize without losing what makes this company ours. Robert leaned back, arms folded. Restructuring, he repeated. That word's been ruining companies for decades. Ignoring the jab, she clicked to the next slide. This is my proposal. You remain CEO. Your experience and relationships are irreplaceable. Mom becomes CFO. She's already managing half the accounting informally. I'd serve as Chief Strategy Officer, responsible for modernization and digital integration. Vanessa would lead marketing and PR where her skills shine. The table went silent. Margaret's expression softened into quiet pride. Vanessa blinked, caught between confusion and disbelief. Robert's jaw tightened. You're dividing my company like a deck of cards, he said finally. Claire's tone didn't waver. I'm aligning it for sustainability. The data's clear. We're losing ground to smaller competitors who innovate faster. This isn't rebellion, Dad. It's stewardship. Vanessa shifted in her chair. You're giving yourself more authority than me, she said, her voice thin with irritation. Marketing reports to strategy in your model. You're basically my boss. Claire met her gaze calmly. We be partners, Vanessa. This structure works only if we cooperate. Robert's fist came down lightly on the table. Enough. This family doesn't need corporate politics at dinner. Margaret spoke for the first time, her voice steady but firm. It's not politics, Robert. It's foresight. Claire's plan is solid. We've ignored her ideas long enough. He turned to her, astonished. You're siding with her? I'm siding with the company we built, she said quietly, and with the daughter who's trying to save it. The air thickened. Vanessa looked away, blinking fast, her confidence crumbling. Claire kept her eyes on her father. "You can reject the plan," she said softly, "but the market won't wait for us to decide who gets credit." Robert stood abruptly, pushing back his chair. "I need time to think," he muttered, leaving his wine untouched as he walked out. The three women sat in silence. Margaret reached for Claire's hand under the table, a subtle show of unity. Vanessa stayed rigid, staring at the untouched dessert plates. No one spoke again that night. Outside, the wind brushed against the townhouse windows, the candlelight flickering between reflection and shadow. The family had always moved in one direction, Robert's, but now, for the first time, the axis had shifted. Everything hung delicately in balance, poised to either heal or break. 3 days later, something subtle began to shift inside Donovan and Partners. The numbers, those same numbers that had once been ignored, now spoke for themselves. Efficiency reports showed record turnarounds, cost savings, and renewed client satisfaction. But it wasn't the spreadsheets that changed everything. It was who noticed them. That Friday, a longtime partner named Gerald Whitman stopped by the office. Whitman ran one of Boston's largest manufacturing distributors, and his voice carried weight across the industry. Standing beside Robert in the lobby, he clapped a hand on the older man's shoulder. "Whatever your daughter's doing with those systems," Whitman said, "it's brilliant. The analytics alone saved us 3 days in transit time this quarter. Smart move putting her in charge." Robert froze, managing a stiff smile. "Of course," he murmured. But Claire could see the truth flicker across his face. "He didn't put me in charge." Word spread quickly. Department heads began looping Claire into meetings she had never been invited to before. She spoke sparingly, focusing on data and solutions. Not credit, but her quiet authority began to fill the room in ways that demanded respect. Even Vanessa, who had avoided her for weeks, knocked softly on her door one evening. "I heard about the Whitman deal," she said. "You really pulled it off." Claire looked up from her desk, surprised. It was a team effort. Vanessa hesitated. "I envy that about you," she admitted. "You never panic, even when everyone's watching." Claire smiled faintly. Maybe I stopped expecting them to watch. After she left, Claire sat for a moment in stillness, realizing that envy from her sister wasn't rooted in resentment. It was a small acknowledgement, maybe even the beginning of understanding. Meanwhile, Robert's morning routine quietly evolved. Each day, before his first coffee, he opened the printed analytics reports that Claire sent through the new dashboard. He said nothing about it, but he read every line, pen in hand, sometimes scribbling notes in the margins. His pride, so immovable for decades, had met something it couldn't easily dismiss: proof. He didn't apologize. He didn't congratulate her. But one afternoon, as she passed his office, he said without looking up, "Good work on the Whitman account." It was barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. And for the first time, Claire didn't feel invisible. She didn't need applause or permission, just the quiet recognition that, after all these years, she had finally been seen. By autumn, Donovan and Partners Logistics no longer looked or operated like the same company. The dusty filing cabinets had vanished, replaced by digital dashboards that updated in real time. The old dispatch radios were gone too, replaced by handheld tablets that tracked every delivery with precision. Client noticed. So did competitors. What had once been a stubborn, old-school firm was now being hailed as a model of modernization across Massachusetts. At the center of it all stood Claire, not as a silent reformer working in the shadows, but as the company's newly appointed Chief Strategy Officer, a title Robert himself had announced during a board meeting 6 weeks earlier. He had cleared his throat awkwardly before reading from the agenda, his tone businesslike, but eyes uncharacteristically soft. "Effective immediately," he had said. "Claire Donovan will oversee strategic development and modernization initiatives for Donovan and partners. There had been polite applause. Only Margaret caught the tremor in his voice, the sound of pride wrapped in surrender. Vanessa, too, had changed. She threw herself into her marketing role with a renewed sense of purpose, her ego replaced by curiosity. Instead of competition, there was cooperation. The sisters began meeting weekly, exchanging ideas over coffee instead of criticisms. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, earned, not forced. Robert still kept his corner office, though he spent less time there now. Sometimes, as he passed Claire's new workspace, he would pause in the doorway, pretending to check a schedule or a call sheet. "We should have done this sooner," he said once, almost to himself. Claire only smiled. "We did it when it mattered," she replied. By November, the view from Claire's own corner office stretched across the Charles River, its surface gilded with the bronze glow of late afternoon. The skyline shimmered in the water's reflection, old Boston meeting the new, just as she had always imagined. On her desk sat a single framed photo, a family snapshot from years ago, taken before ambition and pride had fractured everything. She stood by the window, watching a sailboat drift beneath the bridge, and thought of that night at the old Concord. The laughter, the check sliding across the table, her father's voice saying she wasn't worth more than $1,000. She had carried those words for months, heavy as stones. Now they felt light, almost distant, because the truth was simple. She didn't need to prove her worth anymore. Every shipment tracked, every client retained, every metric improved bore her mark. The system she'd built now powered the very empire that once ignored her. In the reflection on the glass, she saw her father's legacy intertwined with her own. His strength, her vision, her mother's quiet perseverance. The company had finally become what it should have been all along, a family business in more than just name. She turned back to her desk, closing her laptop for the evening. Outside, the wind rippled the surface of the river, carrying the last gold light of the season. Claire allowed herself a small, private smile. He said, "I wasn't worth more than $1,000, she thought. Now his empire runs on my ideas." And with that, she flicked off the lights. The office bathed one last time in the quiet dignity of her triumph.